All right, slight technical glitch. Sorry, Parker. I was asking you about the business model for Zaprite. How are you guys looking at that?
Yeah, so right now, Zaprite is a um, it's based all we are is a software as a service. So we're not charging transaction fees. Basically, customers pay us a fixed fee to access the software, much like they do many other pieces of software. So it's $25 a month if people pay monthly, and there's no minimum commitments. If they want to pay monthly, they can opt in for a month, decide to turn it off after a month. People also get a free month to start to determine whether or not they want to use it, and then they can also opt in into an annual plan to pay, basically upfront and to get a 20% discount. But really, the nature of what we're doing is we're not processing payments. We're not a payment processor. We are delivering a software service to people and charging it as such. We will get more sophisticated. One of the things I realized, both from my time at Unchained as well as kind of one of the priorities when we were starting to work on Zaprite, both Will and I, was before we were out in market selling and kind of being out of our own, in terms of our own story, stealth mode with Zaprite, was that we were charging for the service, and that we were able, if we were going to be in a world of um, offering and helping people accept Bitcoin as payment, that we ourselves would accept Bitcoin as payment for our service. Well, if you're a startup in any other world and you want to insert a piece of fintech software to enable billing for you, you can do that if you're in the fiat world. If you want to accept Bitcoin as payment and you're working on the very problem of Bitcoin payments, then you actually have to build your own billing software. And so, today, long way of saying, we built it in a very kind of fixed fee, flat fee, one size fits all, to keep things simple, because we're a company with limited resources as we're kind of out there delivering this service to early adopters, but also recognizing that being able to have subscriptions that are based on Bitcoin is important. And for us to be both a billing company as well as a Bitcoin payments company, you can't do both of those things as well as you'd like. So we basically had simplifying assumptions on the billing side. We will become more sophisticated on the billing side as we grow and have more resources, and as we're enabling companies more. If people are doing tens of millions of dollars in transactions with Zaprite facilitating, it won't only be $25 in the future. But right now, in terms of the service we offer, it's a very fixed fee. Customers can opt out at any point in time. That they pay on a monthly basis, or they pay on an annual basis. They can change at renewal time either way. And we never touch people's money. So if somebody decides not to pay for the next month, they still get access to their account. They just can't create new invoices. They can't facilitate new payments, but also their funds aren't tied up because Bitcoin was never sitting with Zaprite. And that's also the beauty of how we've built this, that we can enable Bitcoin payments without ever having to touch people's money. And that's not just something ideological. It's just the best way to build what we are trying to build in terms of the service that we're offering, being facilitating Bitcoin payments for individuals and businesses that want to be paid in Bitcoin.
Well done, mate. Well done. Excellent. I love it. I think it's brilliant. I use it, as you know. Happy to have John on the show. If people haven't already heard that, go back and listen to that, because we get more of the backstory of well, first of all, his rabbit hole story, and then why he founded it and how you guys come on board as well. So exciting times ahead for sure, for the space, and for you guys personally. I want to ask you a question. I'd be remiss if I didn't ask you this about the ETFs, considering your background used to be in hedge funds and more of a do you characterize yourself as a recovering Wall Street bro?
Yeah, I do. I also feel like that's becoming far enough distant where I can start to think of myself as somewhere beyond reformed, and working as an entrepreneur and writer, and but yeah,
But if you were
that's part of my history.
if you were still in your old seat at Heyman, What do you think you'd be doing now? What would be the chat around the water cooler about these Bitcoin ETFs and the and not just that hedge fund, but all of the others as well. The cocktail networking events in the boardrooms. Do you have any insight? Do you still in touch with those kind of people? Have they been reaching out to you for any kind of information or advice?
Let's say that uh, it's kind of a trick question because not to um, be pejorative or insulting, but I was working for a hedge fund. Bitcoin started to make sense to me. And once Bitcoin started to make sense to me, the rational thing to do is to stop working at a hedge fund and work on Bitcoin. And not to say I think that hedge funds are part of the problem, but the US financial system is part of the problem. And so anybody that's working on it, and not at the same time working on building Bitcoin, it's kind of working towards the problem. So that say that to then connect that if someone's still working for a hedge fund, they probably don't get Bitcoin. Okay. Or they don't get Bitcoin at a level that will allow them to rationally explain to themselves why Bitcoin could replace the dollar as a currency. And I won't say that 100%, but probably, like even because there's traditional investors that have exposure to Bitcoin that I feel like genuinely get it. I think there's probably missing like the end game because of just how they're positioned. Um, but that's a pretty good rule to follow. So then to say, okay, well, someone in that seat, what would be their mentality around the ETF? And I think that it will be one of, well, if they're still there, they're still denying Bitcoin, but this will make Bitcoin harder to deny. That it will make them harder to say that Bitcoin is not, some pet rock because BlackRock is building a product and the flows are real. X flows are going into it. There's demand for it. Also, it's harder for, I think it's popular, not just among hedge funders, but anyone who's in the denial stage of Bitcoin to say that Bitcoin's for criminals. Some people in the Bitcoin world would say that BlackRock's a criminal, but certainly if you're working for a hedge fund, you don't think that BlackRock's a criminal. And so I think also that for their seat, they will say, well, if I thought that this was just for criminals and now BlackRock and Invesco are doing it, can't keep saying that. And so I think that it makes the denial harder and it probably advances those type of people to the acceptance part of grief. And so, but I don't necessarily think that it alters it doesn't fundamentally alter Bitcoin in either a good or bad way. I think it does potentially make Bitcoin more volatile in the short term because anybody who I think is owning Bitcoin through an ETF, right or wrong, is doing it with less information. Or, because reasonably, even if it doesn't really have anything to do with not your keys, not your Bitcoin. It's like, okay, if you actually got Bitcoin, but you wanted to consciously decide, I don't want to hold my keys, you could hold Bitcoin in a better way with a custodian without the counterparty risk and direct exposure to Bitcoin, such that you didn't actually have to sell for dollars and have a tax event. So, what that naturally translates to is people buying Bitcoin through an ETF that maybe don't understand it, which translate to people kind of buying irrationally and selling irrationally. For me, the most important thing about it is that it makes it more difficult for people to say Bitcoin's for criminals, and that it's not so much that the SEC blessed it. The SEC wanted to prevent a Bitcoin ETF from happening, and a judge in the United States said you're operating in a capricious and functionally illegal way by treating this differently. And now that ETFs are traded, it's harder for the US government to come in and say, this thing, Bitcoin's illegal. Partly because there's going to be very powerful interests that have an economic interest to prevent the powers that they control from doing that. But then also just from an optics perspective, and there might logically be somebody who comes along and says, well, you can own Bitcoin through an ETF, and with the, big brother Wall Street institution, but not otherwise. But then that also just exposes the lizard people as lizard people to people that have their eyes open. So I ultimately think it's good for Bitcoin. I don't think it's transformative, that everyone that's just thinking that Bitcoin, that the people aren't going to have to go through the rigor to understand Bitcoin to really be able to have it make an impact in terms of using it as a tool and storing purchasing power and weaning themselves off of the heroin that is debt and the U.S. financial system. That's still going to, come with some comeuppance.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I often the thing that's kind of crossed my mind is the ETFs, right? So you buy an ETF and you it's it's all baked up in trust. You believe that that provider has some Bitcoin on its balance sheet to cover, to hold for you. Like that's the underlying asset that you believe you're buying, and they're holding it. And to your point, you're coming at it. You're going to rebalance, right? You're going to irrationally buy and irrationally sell. So when you irrationally sell, they can weigh you out in fiat currency. They can sell. They've got cash on a balance sheet as well. I mean, or they can liquidate some other like asset, whatever. You get the cash, but then they get to keep Bitcoin. Do you see what I mean? Like, it's not like they're just going to sell the Bitcoin, so you're weighed out. Uh, I don't know. There's so much here that could go wrong. Um, and then yeah,
I think
go on.
I think there's more if you specifically think about the context of an ETF. If you sell the shares of the ETF, they manage the net asset value of the ETF to its market cap. And so they ultimately will have to sell the underlying asset being Bitcoin. Now, could BlackRock sell the underlying asset out of the ETF and buy it on their own balance sheet for their corporate side? Yes, of course. But over time, everyone's going to figure out that Bitcoin's a better form of money and everyone's going to be accumulating it. So I don't think it's necessarily right to say that that you buy irrationally, sell irrationally, but that then there's always a rational buyer on the other side, right? That these ETFs, most of them at least, are fiat minded, and so the reason why you sell irrationally is because you were always trading Bitcoin to get more dollars because you didn't really understand it, and rather than holding it for the long term because you recognize that you're going to need Bitcoin to store purchasing power, not for a period of time, but for the rest of time, and that in the future you're going to need Bitcoin to buy things like groceries and medicine and water and airplane tickets. That's very different than I'm buying Bitcoin such that if its price in dollars goes up by 50%, I'm going to sell it because I had a 50% dollar gain. And that the majority of people that are buying it through the ETF are going to be minded to do that just by the nature of the product. But the firms are probably similar, but that might change when you see some company like, say, Apple Computer say, oh, yeah, now there's an ETF. Maybe I should own Bitcoin, but I'm not a moron. So I'm rather than buying shares in the BlackRock ETF to put my cash in equivalents, I'm going to just buy Bitcoin.
Yep. And use Zaprite to invoice customers going forward so we can accept Bitcoin.
Or to power their store. Right. Exactly. It's power Apple Pay. Like they're not morons. They're going to figure that out too.
Yeah.
So I think that, and I don't say like buy irrational, sell irrationally to insult people. Say anyone who buys an ETF is a moron. It's that most people that get drawn into Bitcoin because the price is going up. There's both a rational side of buying and there's a rational side to FOMO because price is communicating information and you're responding to a price signal. You might not know why, but you are both behaving rationally when you're buying without knowing, because you caught the signal. Wait, Bitcoin didn't die. It's going up again. I'm not going to miss it this time. But if you don't actually understand the why behind it, you are going to sell. And that's the vast majority of people, because until Bitcoin clicks, it's the rational thing to do. So I don't say that of like buy irrationally, sell irrationally, to be like, oh, these guys are just idiots and don't pay attention to them, because it's part of like the human psychology and part of the human condition. And if we look at the way that Bitcoin is adopted both in herds, but also these waves of up and downs, it's perfectly reasonable. And the majority of people do it that way, so it's just accepting that that's a reality and trying to best fit a logical explanation for it is what I'm trying to do. But also keying in on the point that, hey, if you're only buying Bitcoin because it's now an ETF and it's super easy, but you could, if the ETF is being held at Coinbase, you could just go to Coinbase yourself and buy Bitcoin. And in my view, that would be better. The underlying asset is actually more liquid because the market's bigger and you have fewer layers of counterparty risk. Yeah, you do need to protect an account login, but you can then demand your Bitcoin and you got a better chance of getting it than, if you needed to sell dollars, because that's the other reality. If you're holding the ETF, you're going to figure out Bitcoin at some point while you're holding the ETF. And then you're going to realize, holy shit, even if I wanted to sell the ETF and go buy Bitcoin directly, I'm going to have a tax leakage of at least 20%, which is going to mean I'm actually, if I sold this and immediately bought it back and had to account for taxes, I'm going to own 80% of the Bitcoin that assume Bitcoin went up 10x, it'd be, 20% of 90%.
People are going to be telling this exact story on podcasts in 2 years' time. Like we've all got the shitcoin stories where we got burnt and like messing around with Ethereum and whatever else, or Dash. And people are going to have like the ETF stories exactly as you described.
Yeah, they're going to figure out they just got caught in a trap. Yeah. But it's okay,
Yeah.
But just recognizing that like it will likely do, on the fundamental side, it's good because it provides cover for Bitcoin, makes it harder to refute, makes it harder to deny, makes it harder to claim it's for criminals. And but kind of in the near term probably introduces more volatility because it makes it easy for people who otherwise wouldn't buy Bitcoin to buy it. And those people who naturally wouldn't otherwise buy it are people that are operating from a perspective of limited knowledge of Bitcoin, which translates to people who are going to be trading it to get fiat money, which means on the other side of Bitcoin rising, they're going to be the ones that sell. But then always naturally, some of those people that get drawn in by a rational price signal, they go down the Bitcoin rabbit hole. It's probably just, only 2 out of 10 or 3 out of 10. And then other people come along later.
All right, Park, I got to wrap this one up. If you had one last orange pill left to give to somebody, who would you give it to and why?
I feel like we've done this before.
Twice.
And I was actually, I was actually,
Go on.
You can't remember?
I can't remember. Like
Okay.
who you've said in the past. Do you?
Because I think I remember, but I think I might have changed between my first and my second. And I think now, I'm consistent. I would say, Michael Jordan.
All right.
Orange pill Michael Jordan. He was probably the icon of all icons when I was growing up. Just a symbol of greatness. But if it wasn't him, maybe that, and I actually generally like the guy, but Dave Portnoy, he's got like a massive following. So if he actually got it, then he'd bring a lot of, common sense people on with him. I think the first one I said was like Janet Yellen or Ben Bernanke, but I wouldn't, or Jay Powell. I wouldn't want to, because I think my logic at the first time was if I can turn the Jekyll, the creature of Jekyll Island on itself, then that's what causes every other domino to fall. But there's a human side of this, and rather help somebody that's worth helping.
Have you ever dived into the Secrets of the Federal Reserve by Eustace Mullins? Have you read that one yet?
Is that not the same as the Creature of Jekyll Island?
No, it's different. So Edward Griffin, he wrote The Creature from Jekyll. He wrote that in the
Okay.
90s, I think. Um, but yeah, Eustace Mullins, he wrote The Secrets of the Federal Reserve in the late 40s. You will
Okay.
devour it, Parker. You will love it. I can't believe more Bitcoiners haven't read this book. Uh,
Okay.
and I learned about the book from Ray Youssef when he was on Safe's Pod. And I immediately wrote it down and went and found it, and I couldn't stop reading it. I think I've read it about 3 times already. And it's a shorter book, a way shorter book than Creature from Jekyll. Yeah, there's a lot in there. And I would say the Creature from Jekyll is a prequel. Griffin would have lent a lot on Mullins' work, but because Mullins was writing this, at the back end of the 40s, he was still so close to
Yeah, it was active history,
right,
basically.
exactly.
20 to 30 years post.
And those guys were still alive, and they were
Right.
singing like canaries. Like, it was, and he would sit in the Congressional Library, I think, was where he was doing his study, and just going through all of the notes and just pulling them all out. And it's absolutely incredible, the stuff. Yeah, you'll love it. And one other thing, I can't remember if I learned it from that book. I think so. I had no idea that Nelson Aldrich, who hosted the meeting in Jekyll Island, he was the U.S. Treasurer at the time. He was the one tasked with, making the secret meeting and getting everybody out there. I had no idea that his daughter was married to uh, David Rockefeller. Nelson Rockefeller is named after Nelson Aldrich, his grandfather. And you're
Hmm.
like, oh my gosh. Like,
Yeah.
so for all of those conspiracy theorists out there,
Well,
like, there's the
I
facts. That's just
yeah, the I watched the presentation that the author of The Creature from Jekyll Island gave in like the early 90s. And I think one of the points that he made was what you just said, that these people are out there singing. These people were talking about it, but
Mhm.
that it's like it's not a conspiracy theory. These are what these people
Yes.
said. Like, and more people just need to read about it. That it's not really having to connect dots to then, be somewhere further out on a ledge of, you know, poorly meaning incentives where it's like, wait, no, just listen to like how they did this and
Mhm.
why in their
Mhm.
own words,
Yeah.
and
Big
it becomes apparent.
Mullins was getting a lot of the information from these guys' autobiographies that they were having written for themselves. So it's like, guys, like, here's the dude sitting in his front room telling an author exactly what went down, so it can, it's part of their legacy. Like, uh, it just leaves me speechless, leaves me angry. Yeah, it's so I urge you to read it and shill it and make sure it gets passed around unchained as well, because I know we're already very much orange pilled, but a lot of people still miss that link to,
Yeah.
well, the term that you used earlier, like the lizard people in air quotes. It's yeah, it's all there in plain sight.
Yeah, agree.
Anyway, thanks for coming on again, mate. How can people reach you? And is there any ask of the plebs? Do you need any help at Zaprite? If anybody's got the skill set, should they get in touch?
So find us at zaprite.com, zaprite.com. Realistically, main call is anybody that's a contractor or business that's a Bitcoiner, or a business owner as a Bitcoiner. Think about the logic of accepting Bitcoin as payment, and then consider Zaprite. That would be the call to action. We are still a young, small, mean, lean company, and figuring out how to bootstrap our way through the world. So at the current time, We're not bringing on new positions, but as more Bitcoiners decide to say, pay me in Bitcoin and work with Zaprite, we fully expect to be opening up positions over the course of the year. So, be paying attention, and we'll make those, known and widely known both through our website and other channels. So, hold off on that just yet. Obviously, if people are enterprising and they want to pitch me on anything, please reach out to me personally as well. But yeah, primary call to action, look us up at zaprite.com. Me personally, you can buy my book, Gradually Then Suddenly, on Safe Dean's website, thesafehouse.com. It's exclusively for sale there. There's a reason. I want to support Safe. I want people to be able to pay in Bitcoin. I want to, strategically do it for myself, because Amazon's not the answer to everything. But find the book on thesafehouse.com. You can pay for it in Bitcoin. And also, when you think about buying my book, think about your 20 closest friends who don't understand Bitcoin, and just go ahead and buy them a copy of the book too while you're at it. And then also, I'm on Twitter, Parke'r A. Lewis. So kind of sharing things that I'm working on there primarily.
Cool. Well, thanks again, mate, for coming on. Third time. Thank you for everything that you've done in the Bitcoin space. You've been a big part of my own rabbit hole journey, reading your articles way back in the day when I was trying to piece all this together. And yeah, all of the podcasts that I've heard you on in the past as well. So huge personal thank you from myself and on behalf of my family that don't even know. So,
Well, I appreciate you. You were explaining that. I was just thinking about some of the old questions that Lauren asked me. So her, today hers just happened to overlap with the substance of the day. So that's always fun. And I always appreciate you having me on. So helping to get the word out, and also just good to always catch up, but also just so values align. So thanks for what you do.
Thank you, man. Take care. Have a great day.
Appreciate it.